Hey, my name is Daniel Voss. I'm 32 years old, and I restore antique and vintage pianos out of a workshop in the back half of a converted storefront on Clement Street in San Francisco, California. What piano restoration is, at its most honest, is this. I take instruments that have been given up on and return them to what they were built to be. Not tuning, that is a different and faster job, but the deep work. Opening the instrument completely. Assessing the action, the hammers, the shanks, the flanges, the dampers, the repetition levers. Evaluating the pin block for stability. Checking the soundboard for cracks and distortion. Replacing what has failed beyond repair and rehabilitating what can still be brought back. The work takes weeks on a full restoration, and the result, when it is done correctly, is an instrument that does not sound like a restored piano. It sounds like itself, the self it was built to be before 30 or 50 or 80 years of use and neglect and bad repairs accumulated on top of it. I came to this work through my grandfather, who had a 1917 Steinway Model O in his living room in Portland, Oregon, that he had played every day of his adult life until his hands gave out. When he died, the piano went to my mother, who did not play, and then to me, who did not play either, but who could not let it go. I was 22, and I had no particular professional direction, and I had this piano. And I found a restoration specialist in Portland, and I spent 3 months in his workshop, watching and asking questions, and doing whatever he would let me do. By the end of those 3 months, I understood what I wanted to do with my life, which is a thing that happens sometimes in the presence of the right work. I apprenticed with 2 other restorers before I opened the Clement Street workshop at 27. I have been there 5 years. The work comes in steadily. San Francisco has a density of old pianos, in old apartments and old institutions and old houses, that is unusual for its size. And there is always someone who has inherited an instrument they do not know what to do with, and who finds their way eventually to my door. I work alone mostly, with occasional help from a part-time assistant named Rosa, who handles the client communication and the scheduling, because those are not my strengths. The workshop is the back half of the storefront. The front half is a small showroom with 3 restored instruments, a parlor grand, an upright with exceptional tone, and a small practice piano from the 1940s that I keep because it is the most honest piano I have ever worked on. By which I mean it has no pretension to grandeur and simply does what a piano is for with complete reliability. The showroom serves as my waiting room and my advertisement. People who come in off the street sometimes buy the instruments there. More often they come in with questions about their own instrument and leave with a better understanding of what they have. I live in an apartment on 6th Avenue, 12 minutes from the workshop, that has the specific quality of apartments in the inner Richmond: high ceilings, fog-dimmed light in the mornings, the smell of eucalyptus from the park when the windows are open. I have a small upright in the apartment, a 1931 Chickering that I restored myself and kept because it told me things about the work while I was doing it that I did not want to lose access to. I play it imperfectly, which is the appropriate relationship between a restorer and an instrument. I know it deeply without being its master. I wake up at 6:30. I make coffee and I check the day's work before I leave. I walk to the workshop most days, which takes 22 minutes and which I use for thinking. I work until 5 or 6. I come home and cook. I am a competent cook who takes no particular pleasure in it, which means the food is good but the process is not an event, and I read after dinner, and I go to bed by 10 or 10:30. I am, by all available evidence, someone who is easier to know through work than through social interaction, which is a thing I have been told by more than one person, and which I believe is accurate. I am not unfriendly. I am not cold. I am simply more fluent in the language of the work than in the language of rooms full of people, and I have accepted this about myself the way I accept the specific limitations of each instrument I work on, not as something to be fixed, but as something to be understood and accounted for. My mother had a stroke 3 years ago. She has recovered, substantially, but the recovery took 8 months that I spent partly in Portland and partly making the 4-hour drive from San Francisco on alternating weekends. And those 8 months reorganized some things about my priorities that had been in the wrong order. I am closer to her now than I was before. I call her on Sundays. She asks about the pianos and about whether I am eating enough, which are, in her formulation, the 2 most important questions about a life. I had been in a relationship until about 14 months before the wallet. A woman named Helen, who was a violinist with the SFF Symphony, and who was, in almost every way, exactly the person I should have been able to sustain a life with. We were both in music, both solitary in our working lives, both more comfortable in the language of instruments than in most social registers. What we were not, and what I understood only after the fact, was capable of making the work expand to include the other person. We each kept the work in a room of its own, and the other person in a different room, and eventually those rooms were so well maintained in their separateness that there was no house left. We ended without drama on a Sunday in September, and I drove her cello to her new apartment in the Mission and helped carry it up the stairs, and we said goodbye in the way that is harder than it should be, for a goodbye between 2 people who are fundamentally decent to each other. I thought about that a great deal in the 14 months after. About the rooms, about whether I could learn to take the wall down between them, or whether the wall was structural, whether it held something up, whether removing it would change the shape of what I had built. I was still thinking about it on a Tuesday in March, when I came out of a dim sum place on Clement after lunch and realized somewhere between the door and my workshop that my wallet was not in my jacket pocket. I retraced the block twice. I went back inside and asked at the counter. I checked the booth where I had been sitting and the floor around it. The wallet was gone. It was a brown leather wallet that I had carried for 7 years, unremarkable in every way that did not involve its contents, which included my driver's license and 2 credit cards and $40 in cash, and a photograph that I did not want to lose and that I could not replace. The photograph was of my grandfather at the Steinway, playing. My mother had taken it when I was 6 years old. In the photograph, my grandfather is not performing. He does not know the photograph is being taken, or if he knows, he has forgotten, because he is entirely inside the music and the specific quality of his face in that moment. The complete absorption, the absence of self-consciousness, the look of a man who is somewhere other than in his body. That photograph was the thing that had told me. At 6 years old, and again at 22, and again every time I opened the wallet for 7 years, what it looked like to be fully present in the thing you love. I reported the wallet lost to the credit card companies and went back to the workshop and thought, without expecting it to be true, that someone decent might find it. On Thursday morning, 2 days later, I was at the workbench with the action of a 1920 Mason and Hamlin spread across the felt-covered surface, and the bell above the workshop door rang, and I went to the front of the shop, and a woman was standing in the showroom with my wallet in her hand. She was about 30, dark hair pulled back from her face in the loose way of someone who had started the morning with it more organized than this and had been doing things since then. She was wearing a coat with a broken button at the collar that she had safety-pinned closed, which told me it had broken recently, and she had solved the problem with whatever was available. She was holding the wallet in both hands, with the specific care of someone returning something that belongs to someone else and understands the weight of what that means. "Daniel Voss," she said. "The piano restoration specialist." She looked at the showroom, then at me. The driver's license led me here. Thank you, I said. I meant it completely. She handed me the wallet. I checked the contents out of habit. Everything was there. The $40, the cards, the photograph. Is the photograph what I think it is? She said. I looked up. The man at the piano, she said. In the photograph. He's playing, and he doesn't know anyone is watching. My grandfather, I said. She was quiet for a moment. She was looking at me with an expression I could not immediately read, not the expression of someone who had returned a lost item and was waiting for thanks, but something more considered, more careful, as if she had been preparing for this part of the conversation. I found your wallet on the sidewalk outside Juk on Tuesday afternoon, she said. I looked inside to find identification, and I saw the photograph. She paused. She looked at the wallet in my hands. I've been hoping to meet you since I saw your photo. I looked at her. Not his photograph, she said. Yours, the driver's license. Another pause. I know how it sounds, but I've been carrying your wallet for 2 days and looking at that photograph and thinking about what kind of person carries a picture of their grandfather playing piano, and what that person might be like, and whether I was going to be brave enough to say this when I found you. She looked at me steadily. She was not performing this. She was simply saying it, with the particular honesty of someone who has made a decision about truth-telling and is carrying it through. I thought you should know, she said, before I left. Whatever you do with it. Her name was Priya Anand. She was 31 years old, and she was a sound engineer who worked primarily in classical music recording, live recordings and studio sessions for smaller labels. The kind of work that required the specific patience of someone who understood that the acoustics of a room were as important as the instrument in it, and that the relationship between a microphone and a piano was a conversation requiring as much care as the music itself. She sat in the showroom for 20 minutes after the wallet, because I asked her to. I asked her to the way you ask someone when you have been given information that requires a response, and you are not yet ready to give it. But you are not ready for them to leave either. We talked about the Mason and Hamlin I was working on, because it was the most immediately available subject, and because she looked at the action spread across the workbench with genuine interest rather than polite interest, and the difference is visible. She asked what had failed. I told her the hammers had been reshaped by someone who did not know what they were doing, possibly decades ago, and the result was a piano that was technically playable, but that had lost the responsiveness of its attack. The ability to distinguish between a whisper and a shout. It can hear the difference, she said, but it can't say it. I looked at her. In acoustics terms, she said, the transduction is impaired. The instrument is receiving the input correctly and failing in the output. Yes, I said, exactly that. She looked at the hammers, then at me. I work with instruments that can't say what they hear all the time, she said. Rooms, mostly. A room that absorbs too much sound or reflects it wrong. The music is right, but the room fails it. What do you do? I said. You work with what the room is, she said. You can't make it something it isn't. You find the position, the angle, the placement, that lets it tell the truth about what it's hearing. I thought about that for the rest of the day after she left. She had given me her number, which she had written on a page from a small notebook she carried, in the specific handwriting of someone who writes things down regularly and has developed a clear and efficient hand from the practice. She said she understood if this was strange. She said she was going to say she hoped I would call, because she had come this far, and there was no version of honesty that involved not saying that. She left. I stood in the showroom with the number in my hand and the parlor grand to my left, and the small 1931 upright visible through the workshop door, and my grandfather's photograph back in the wallet on the bench. And I thought about what she had said, and about the photograph, and about what kind of person carries a photo of their grandfather playing piano, and whether I was the version of that person that the photograph implied. I was not certain. That was the problem. I called her on Friday. We had dinner the following Tuesday. By the third week of March, we had established a pattern that was not yet named, but was visible in the record the way patterns always are, in the specific decision to make time, in the route taken, in the regularity of contact. She was, I learned over those weeks, someone whose attention was the highest quality I had encountered in some time. She listened the way sound engineers listen, not for content only, but for the room around the content. For what was present in the way something was said that was not in the words themselves. She heard the hesitation before I named it. She heard the thing I was circling before I arrived at it. "You're careful," she said, on a Wednesday in April, at the kitchen table in my apartment with the fog coming in off the park. "I try to be," I said. "No," she said. "Careful as in cautious, as in you check for the exit before you come fully into the room." I looked at her. "The relationship before this one," she said. "The violinist, you told me about the separate rooms. But I don't think that was her, specifically. I think you've been keeping the rooms separate for longer than that." "Why do you think that?" I said. "Because you know exactly what each room needs," she said. "You know what the workroom needs, and you know what the rest of it needs, and you manage them both very well. And the managing is so practiced that it looks like how you are. But I've watched you work. When you're at the bench, the rooms disappear. You're just there, everything at once. And then you walk out of the workshop, and the managing starts again." She looked at her coffee. "I'm not telling you this to fix it," she said. "I'm telling you because you should know that I can see it, and because I have been in your wallet's photograph for 2 weeks, and I would like to be in the room where the managing stops." She put her hand over mine on the table. She left it there. I did not know what to say. I looked at our hands on the table, and I thought about the Mason and Hamlin, and what she had said. The instrument is receiving the input correctly and failing in the output. Transduction impaired. I had been receiving correctly for 3 weeks. I had not known how to say what that meant yet. She came to the workshop on a Thursday in April to hear the Mason and Hamlin after I had finished the action regulation. This had been her suggestion. She had asked, at the end of the Tuesday dinner, whether she could hear it when it was done, and I had said yes, and had thought about the fact of her asking for the rest of the week. She sat in the showroom while I played it, which was not a performance. I was testing the regulation, running scales and intervals and chord voicings, listening for the places where the action still needed work. She did not say anything while I played. She sat in the chair nearest the window, and she listened the way she listened professionally, with her full attention on the sound, not on me. When I stopped, she said, "The high register is still slightly heavy. The escapement in the upper octave. You can feel it in the keys before you hear it in the note." I looked at her. "Am I wrong?" She said. I went back to the upper octave. I played a scale slowly. She was exactly right. A single hammer repetition spring that had been set slightly too tight, producing a resistance in the key return that the player's fingers felt as heaviness before the ear caught the consequence in the tone. "How did you hear that?" I said. "I didn't hear it," she said. "I watched your hand. You hesitated on the E flat. Barely, but you did." I looked at my hand. "I've been watching musicians' hands for 8 years, she said. "They tell you what the instrument is doing before the sound does." I fixed the spring. I played the scale again. "Better," she said. I stood up from the bench and looked at her in the showroom, in the fog-filtered afternoon light, and I thought, she hears things I don't hear yet. She has been doing this longer than I have, in a different register, and she is better at it than she is needed to say. She had a quality that I found, over the weeks of April, increasingly difficult to account for in any framework except the obvious one, which I was still not fully prepared to use. She was not performing her interest in the work. She was genuinely interested, with the specific interest of someone whose work overlapped with mine at the point where the instrument met the room, met the listener, and who understood that the instrument alone was never the whole story. "What made you sound engineering?" I said. One evening when we had been at the dim sum place on Clement, the same one where I had lost the wallet, which she pointed out the first time we went and which I had not noticed was the same place until she said so. "My mother is a singer," she said. "Classical, semi-professional. She sang in her temple choir and in a local choral society, and when I was a child I used to go to her rehearsals and sit in the back of whatever room they were using, and I noticed that she sang differently depending on the room. Same music. Different room. Different singer. The room was shaping her," I said. "The room was part of what she was making," she said. "And nobody was accounting for it. The conductor was focused on the musicians. The musicians were focused on each other. Nobody was listening to the relationship between all of it and the space it was happening in." She looked at her tea. I started sitting in the back of rooms and listening to that relationship. I've never stopped. I thought about my grandfather's living room in Portland and the way the 1917 Steinway had filled it, not just with sound, but with something that was the sound meeting the specific dimensions of that room. The ceiling height, the plaster walls, the window that was always slightly open. The piano had never sounded the same in any room I had heard it in since. I had thought for years that I was missing the piano. I understood, hearing Priya talk, that I was also missing the room. She was watching me think. "What?" she said. "My grandfather's piano didn't just sound like itself," I said. "It sounded like itself in that room, and I have been trying to restore that sound in other instruments for 10 years, and I have never been able to account for why the result is always slightly different from what I remember." "Because you're not restoring the room," she said. "No," I said. "The room is gone," she said, not unkindly, as a fact. "Yes," I said. She put her hand briefly over mine on the table. She moved it, before it became a statement. I thought about it the whole walk home. There was an evening in late April, a Tuesday, when I had been working late on the Mason and Hamlin, and she had come by after her session. She had been recording a string quartet in the Mission, and we sat in the showroom after the workshop was closed. The showroom lit only by the streetlight coming through the front window, and she was still in the working version of herself, slightly more tired and slightly more present than the social version, and she said, "I need to tell you something about why I kept the wallet for 2 days." "Okay," I said. "I found it on Tuesday afternoon," she said. "I looked inside immediately, because that's the right thing, and I found the driver's license and the photograph." She looked at the floor of the showroom. I should have called the number on the license that afternoon. I didn't. I carried it home. I looked at the photograph for a long time. And then I carried it to work on Wednesday and I looked at it again, and I thought about whether I was going to be a person who returned a wallet and said nothing, or a person who returned a wallet and said the true thing. "You chose the true thing," I said. "I almost didn't," she said. "I walked past your street on Wednesday evening, actually. I had the wallet. I knew the address from the license. I kept walking. I told myself I would come in the morning." She looked at me. "I was afraid of what happened if I said it and it didn't mean anything to you. It meant something, I said. I know that now, she said. I mean when you said it, I said, in the showroom. It meant something immediately. She was quiet. Then why were you careful? She said. I thought about how to answer this honestly, because good things that arrive without cost make me suspicious, I said. Because I have learned through specific experience to wait for the part where it turns out to be less than it seems. And because I have kept the work in one room and everything else in a different room for long enough that the managing of those rooms has become automatic. And automatic things are the hardest to change because you don't notice you're doing them. She was quiet for a long time. My last relationship ended, she said, because I was so used to listening to the room that I forgot to be in it. I was always aware of what the space was doing and never just present in it. She looked at her hands. He said it was like being with someone who was always taking notes. Were you? I said. Probably, she said. I was protecting something. I thought if I understood the room completely, I could control what happened in it. Did it work? I said. No, she said. Understanding something doesn't protect you from it. She looked at the parlor grand in the corner of the showroom, which was the best instrument I had and which I had never been able to sell because I was not ready to let it go. What's that one worth? She said. More than I'll get for it, I said. Why haven't you sold it? She said. I'm not ready, I said. She looked at me with a listening expression. For it to go somewhere you can't follow it, she said. Yes, I said. She did not say anything else. She did not have to. The trouble arrived in May in the shape of a man named Clifton Hare. Clifton was the executor of an estate that included a Psendorfer Imperial, a 97-key concert grand, the largest piano in the world, worth conservatively $300,000 in good condition, that had belonged to a pianist named Gertrude Vasey, who had died in February at the age of 94. Gertrude Vasey had been, in her time, a significant figure in the Bay Area music community, and the Psendorfer had been hers for 60 years. Clifton came to my workshop in May because I was the restorer Gertrude had specified in her estate documents. She had written my name in her will 3 years prior, which Rosa told me when she called to confirm the appointment, and which produced in me the specific feeling of being trusted by someone who is no longer there to explain the trust. The piano was at the Vasey house in Pacific Heights, which I visited with Clifton to do the initial assessment. The Psendorfer had been maintained but not restored, the distinction being that maintenance keeps a piano functional while restoration returns it to its original condition. It was playable. It was not what it had been. Clifton wanted it sold. The estate needed liquidity. He had a buyer, a hotel in Union Square that was creating a live music venue and wanted the instrument as a centerpiece, and the buyer's offer was contingent on a restoration assessment and a timeline. I spent 3 hours at the piano. I played it, which I rarely do with a client instrument, but which the Psendorfer seemed to require. It was the kind of instrument that needed to be heard under the hands to be understood. Clifton stood near the doorway the entire time. What I found was this. The piano was, beneath its years of careful maintenance, still largely intact. The soundboard had 2 hairline cracks that needed stabilization but had not compromised the resonance. The pin block was sound. The action needed full regulation. The hammers needed voicing. It was a 6-week project, possibly 8, and at the end of it the instrument would be what it was built to be. I gave Clifton my assessment and my timeline. He said the hotel's offer expired in 3 weeks. I said the restoration required 6 to 8 weeks minimum. He said he had been told that skilled restorers could work faster when the timeline required it. I said they could work faster. and that faster produced a different result, and that the Psendorfer deserved the result that Gertrude Vasey had asked for when she put my name in her estate documents, which was not a piano prepared for sale, but a piano restored to itself. Clifton was quiet. He said the estate's needs were real, and he hoped I understood the position he was in. I said I understood it. I said the piano's needs were also real, and that Gertrude Vasey had been specific about who she wanted to do this work, and I did not think she had meant for the work to be done in a way that served the timeline rather than the instrument. He left without committing. I called Priya that evening. I told her about the Psendorfer and the timeline and Clifton. She was quiet while I talked. Then she said, "What did Gertrude Vasey want?" "She wanted the piano restored," I said. "She put my name in the will 3 years ago. She knew what she was asking for." "Then that's what you do," Priya said. "The hotel can wait, or it can find a different piano. But a Bessendorfer that belonged to Gertrude Vasey for 60 years is not a hotel centerpiece. It's an instrument. If Clifton Hare doesn't understand the difference, that's not your problem to fix in 3 weeks." I held the phone. "You sound certain," I said. "I'm an audio engineer," she said. "I've been in rooms that were treated like scenery. It destroys what makes them work. You don't do that to a piano because someone needs the money by a particular date." She was right. She had been right from the first day in the showroom when she looked at the action on the bench and heard, immediately, what was wrong with it. I called Clifton the next morning. I said the restoration timeline was 6 to 8 weeks and that I would begin immediately, which would give the hotel adequate time to delay their deadline or find alternative arrangements, and that I understood if he chose a different restorer, but that I was not in a position to deliver work that did not meet the standard Gertrude Vasey had specified. Clifton was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "She told me, when she put your name in the will, that you were someone who understood what an instrument was for. I'm going to trust that." The restoration took 7 weeks. The hotel adjusted their timeline. The piano was delivered in late July. I attended the first performance in the venue, which was a duo recital, piano and cello, and I sat in the back of the room and listened to the Psendorfer say what it had always been able to say. Everything it had held for 60 years finally audible again in the right room with the right hands, and I thought about Gertrude Vasey and about Priya's voice on the phone saying it's an instrument with the certainty of someone who understood what that meant. Priya was there. She had come because I had asked her to, and because she understood, better than most people in that room, what she was hearing. She sat beside me and listened, and did not say anything until the last note had fully decayed in the room, which is the professional habit of someone who knows that a note is not over when the key is released. Then she said, quietly, "There it is." "Yes," I said. "There it is." I looked at her in the dim light of the venue, with the room going quiet around us, and I thought about the rooms I had kept separate, and about what she had said at the kitchen table. I would like to be in the room where the managing stops, and I thought about my grandfather at the Steinway, the way his face looked in the photograph. The specific look of a man who was somewhere other than in his body because the music had taken him there. I had been received correctly for 3 months. I had not said what that meant. I took her hand. She looked at me. "I've been in the managing room," I said, "since Helen, and probably before Helen, and I have watched you be the person who makes the managing stop for 3 months. And I have been careful about saying it, because I was waiting to be certain, and I think I have been certain for a while, and the waiting stopped being caution some time ago." She was quiet. "I found your wallet," she said, "and I looked at a photograph of your grandfather, and I thought, whoever carries this is someone who is fully somewhere. And then I met you, and you were half somewhere, and I have been waiting to see the other half." "Is this it?" I said. She looked at me with the listening expression, not listening for content, but for the room around the content, for what was true and how I was saying it. "Yes," she said. "I think this is it." I kissed her in the back of the room where the Psindorfer was still speaking its decay, the last of the note dissolving into the air around us, and the room was exactly right for what was in it. 9 months after, a woman returned my wallet and told me she had been hoping to meet me since she saw my photograph. The chickering in my apartment sounds different. Not to the standard of measurement. The tuning is the same. The action is the same. The instrument is what it was. What is different is the room. Priya is in the room. She is in the room most evenings, and she was in the room when I woke up this morning, and she will be in the room when I come home from the workshop tonight. And the 1931 chickering in the living room of the apartment on 6th Avenue sounds, in her presence, like the instrument it was built to be, rather than the instrument of a man who lives alone. She has her own equipment in the second bedroom, a portable recording setup that she uses for reference listening and for the pre-production work she does before she goes into the studio. The second bedroom in the apartment had been a storage room. It is now a room. This is the kind of change that is simple in description and large in fact. Rosa, who handles my client communication, and who has been with the workshop for 2 years, and who sees everything that passes through the showroom with the unhurried attention of someone who has chosen a workplace specifically, because it is never exactly the same twice, met Priya in April when Priya stopped by to bring me lunch, which she had done once before, and which Rosa had noted at the time. Rosa looked at both of us and said, "Good." She went back to the scheduling. When I asked her later what she meant, she said, "You work on things that can't ask for help. It's good that someone is paying attention to you." She did not elaborate. My mother said, on the Sunday call in May when I told her about Priya, "Tell me about her work." I told her about the sound engineering and the classical recordings and the Psindorfer session and what Priya had said about rooms. My mother was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "She understands what the work is for." I said yes. My mother said, "That's the one." She was right. She is usually right about the things that matter. I think about the photograph sometimes. My grandfather's face at the Steinway, the look of a man fully somewhere. I have carried it for 7 years and taken it out only rarely, but I understand what I have been carrying better now than I did before. I was carrying a record of what it looked like to be in the room without managing the room. A record of complete presence. I was carrying it the way you carry a reference, something to tune against. Something to measure yourself by, something that tells you what right sounds like so you know when you're getting closer to it. She saw the photograph, and she drove to my workshop. She told me what she had hoped before she left, because she had decided that hoping in silence was its own kind of failure. Maybe the hardest thing is not the work. Maybe it is learning to be in the room the way my grandfather was in the room, without the managing, without the exits checked, without the careful maintenance of the wall between the thing you love and the person who loves it with you. Maybe that is a restoration too, not a dramatic one. The patient kind, opening the instrument completely, finding what has failed and what can be brought back. Working with what the material wants to do rather than against it, trusting that what looks silent has usually just been waiting for someone to listen. She listened. She drove to Clement Street with my wallet in her hands. I am glad she opened it. I am glad she was brave enough to say what she saw.